The empty patch of space at the center of the Veil Ordinate's victory formation was not empty for very long. Forecaster Iru Sen felt it first as a wrongness in her own bones, a half-second before the instruments agreed with her. She stood at the prediction lattice of the flagship Hollow Crown, and the lattice was lying. It had never lied before. For 2,000 years the Ordinate had bent the future the way a child bends a reed, and the lattice had always shown them where the reed would break. Now it showed her nothing, a blank coordinate, a hole in the shape of a ship. "Repeat the cast," she said. Her voice did not shake. She had trained for 40 years to keep it from shaking. The lattice technician cast again. Threads of probability spun out from the flagship, fanned across the formation of 900 ordinate vessels, and where they should have wrapped neatly around every object in the volume, they instead curled away from one point and refused to touch it. The threads behaved as though that point of space did not exist, as though it had been deleted from the rules. "Forecaster," the technician whispered, "there is something there, we simply cannot see what." Iru Sen had spent her whole life learning that the Ordinate did not have blind spots. The Ordinate made blind spots. It made them in its enemies, who would suddenly forget which way they had been running, who would find their weapons pointed at empty void while a Veil cruiser slid up behind them through a fold in distance that should not have fit a ship. The galaxy had a word for the Veil now, and the word was inevitable. You did not fight inevitability. You knelt to it, or you were unwritten. The blank coordinate sat 11,000 kilometers off the flagship's bow, exactly between the Hollow Crown and the smoldering world below. That world was called Taman Reach by the soft creatures who had lived there, and it had been ordinate property for 19 hours. The conquest had been clean. The Veil did not do messy. They had folded a strike group into the planet's orbit before the locals' alarms could finish sounding, unmade their 3 defense platforms, and accepted the surrender of a civilization that had never even seen the faces of its conquerors. Now the formation hung in orbit like a closing hand, waiting only for the Ordinate's prime to descend and collect the oaths. And in the middle of that closing hand, the universe had a hole in it. Iru Sen had logged 11,000 castings in her career. She had read the deaths of worlds before they happened, and felt nothing worse than fatigue. The lattice had never frightened her, because the lattice was hers, a tame thing, a hound that fetched the future and laid it at her feet. She knew its moods. She knew the particular shiver it gave when an enemy fleet tried to hide behind a fold, and the duller weight it carried when a planet's defenses were too primitive to bother modeling. She knew, in short, every way the lattice could behave, because in 2,000 years the Veil had catalogued them all. This was not one of them. The blank coordinate did not feel like an enemy hiding. It did not feel like a fold, or a screen, or any of the 10,000 tricks the Ordinate had broken across 2,000 years of war. It felt like a question the lattice did not know how to ask. And Iru Sen, standing at the prediction lattice of the flagship with her hands very still at her sides, understood that she was about to learn something the catalog did not contain, and that learning it might be the last thing she ever did. "Forecaster," said the technician again. "Your orders." She did not answer right away. She was watching the threads curl away from the blank coordinate, watching them refuse to touch it, and she was thinking about the only other time in her life she had seen the lattice behave like this. It had been 40 years ago, when she was a student, and an old instructor had shown the class a single archived casting from before the Ordinate's rise, a casting made by a forecaster long dead, of a thing the dead forecaster had called an unanswerable. The instructor had shown it as a curiosity, a relic of a clumsier age, and had assured the class that the modern lattice could model anything, that unanswerables were a superstition of the past. Iru Sen had believed her. Everyone had believed her. That was what it meant to be Veil. You believed that the past's impossible things were the present's solved ones. The archived casting and the thing in front of her now had the same shape. She had not thought about it in 40 years. She thought about it now, and her hands stopped being quite so still. "Bring the prime," Iru Sen said. He came, Veil Andrael, prime of the third expansion, oldest living bender of the lattice, walked onto the prediction deck wearing the long gray of his office. He was very calm. He had been calm at the unmaking of 40 worlds. He looked at the blank coordinate the way a surgeon looks at a tumor, with interest and no fear. "It is hiding from the future," he said. "Curious. Pull it into the present. Cast a binding fold around the coordinate and squeeze. Whatever it is, it will have to choose a single position, and then we will see it." The benders obeyed. Across the flagship, the great resonant chambers that let the veil fold space lit one by one, and a binding fold closed around the blank coordinate like a fist closing around a wasp. This was the move that had ended empires. The fold would shrink the volume of real space the hidden object was allowed to occupy until it had nowhere left to be but visible, until it was crushed into a single certain point and held there for the unmaking. The fold reached the coordinate and stopped. Iru Sen watched the readout and did not understand what she was seeing. The fold was supposed to contract. Instead, it had frozen at a fixed radius, a perfect sphere of squeezed space, 3 kilometers across, and it would not close 1 meter further. Something inside it was pushing back. Not with engines, not with a counterfold. Something inside that sphere was simply refusing to let the rules apply to it, the way a stone refuses to be argued with. "More benders," said Vale Andrail. He was no longer quite so calm. 200 benders joined the fold. The sphere of squeezed space groaned. Stars behind it smeared sideways as light itself was bent around the contest. The flagship's hull began to sing a low note as the strain bled back through the lattice into the metal. The sphere held. "Forecaster," the Prime said quietly. "Cast its future. I do not care if the lattice says it has none. Force a thread onto it." Iru Sen cast. She put her whole trained will into a single thread of probability and drove it at the hidden thing like a spear. For one instant the thread caught. For one instant she saw. She saw the future of the blank coordinate, and the future was the hollow crown coming apart. She tore her mind back so hard that she fell to her knees on the deck. Blood ran from one of her ears. The technicians were shouting. She heard them the way you hear voices through deep water. "Release the fold," she said. No one moved. "Release the fold," she said again, and this time she found the strength to make it an order from the forecaster, which even a prime could not ignore in the moment of a casting. "If we squeeze it any further, it will choose to be seen, and I have seen what it does when it chooses to be seen. Release. Release now." Vale Andrail looked at her on the deck with blood on her cheek, and for the first time in 200 years, the Prime of the Third Expansion hesitated. That hesitation was the last thing the Vale Ordinate ever did from a position of safety, because the thing in the blank coordinate did not wait for them to decide. It had felt the fold. It had felt the spear of forced future driven into it. It had, in its own patient way, made a decision, and the decision was that the hiding was over. The blank coordinate uncloaked. It did not shimmer into view. It did not fade up the way a Vale ship faded out of a fold. It simply was not there, and then it was there, all at once, a single hard fact, 11,000 kilometers off the flagship's bow, and the prediction lattice screamed as 4,000 years of careful probability collapsed into one ugly certainty. It was a warship. It was longer than any 3 ordinate cruisers laid end to end. Its hull was the gray of a thing that has been somewhere with no stars for a very long time, scarred and re-welded and scarred again, every plate of it telling a story of being hit and not breaking. Along its flanks ran rows of ports that the lattice could not classify, because the lattice had never seen weapons like these, and the lattice had seen everything. There were no graceful curves on it. There was no art to it. It was a tool built by something that had decided, long ago, that the universe was a problem, and this was the answer. On its prow, in a script the Vale could not read, was a name. The translation engines would not have a meaning for it for another 6 minutes. When they finally did, the meaning was 2 words: Aegis Unbroken. And below the name, smaller, a second line of the same hard script, which the engines rendered as a single word that the Ordinate had spent 2,000 years teaching the galaxy to never, ever say to the Vale. The word was no. For 3 full seconds, the most powerful war formation in the eastern arm of the galaxy did absolutely nothing. 900 ships, 200,000 crew, a prime who had unmade 40 worlds. All of them stared at the impossible gray shape that had appeared inside their own fist, and not one of them gave an order, because not one of them had a category for what they were looking at. Iru Sen, on her knees, with blood drying on her cheek, was the only one aboard the Hollow Crown who already understood. The future she had touched was not a possibility. It was a memory the universe had not finished having yet, and there was nothing the Ordinate could do, no fold, no binding, no oldest trick of the oldest bender, that would stop it from happening, because the gray ship had already decided that it would. "It let us find it," she whispered. "It wanted the fold. It wanted us to squeeze. It needed to know exactly how many of us were here before it chose to be real." Vale Undrael turned to her. "Forecaster, what is it?" She looked up at the Prime, and for the first time in her life she told him a truth he did not want. "It is the thing your lattice cannot see, Prime. It is the one shape in the universe that does not obey the rules we were so proud of bending, and we just closed our whole formation around it before we knew that." On the gray ship's flank, the unclassifiable ports began, very slowly, to open. The first order Vale Undrael gave was the wrong one, and he knew it the moment the words left his mouth. Fold a strike of 40 cruisers behind it. Take it from the blind side. It was the move that had never failed. The Vale did not trade fire. They folded distance, appeared where their enemy had no armor, and unmade the engines before the enemy understood the fight had begun. 40 cruisers lit their resonant chambers. 40 pockets of space behind the gray ship began to thin, the way the surface of water thins before something rises through it. The gray ship's flank ports finished opening. What came out of them was not light, and it was not metal, and the lattice had no word for it. It looked, on the readouts, like the absence of probability. Where the Veil bent the future to put a ship where they wanted it, the gray ship's weapons did the opposite. They reached into the 40 thinning pockets of folded space, and they made those pockets certain. They collapsed the fold before it could open. 40 cruisers, mid-fold, halfway between here and there, found that there had been taken away from them. Half their hulls arrived, the other half did not. The lattice recorded the deaths of 19,000 Veil in 4/10 of a second, and the recording was a flat, calm line, because the Veil who died had not had time to be afraid. Iru Sen watched the flat line on the readout and felt something she had not felt since she was a child. She felt small. "It uncollapses our folds," she said. "Prime, it does not block them. It waits until we are inside one, and then it decides for us that the fold was never going to open. We cannot use distance against it. The moment we step out of space, it is already deciding that we will not arrive." "Then we will not use distance," said Val Landral. The calm was back in his voice, but it was a brittle calm now, the calm of a man holding a door that has begun to bend. "We are 900. It is one. Bring every weapon we have to bear in normal space, and fire on a single point until that single point ceases to exist. No folds, no tricks. Mass. Drown it in mass." This, at least, was a thing the formation could do quickly. 900 Veil warships swung their throwers toward the gray ship. The throwers did not fire shells. They fired collapsed slugs of weighted probability, each one a small certainty that whatever it touched would be in the wrong place at the wrong time and would tear itself apart from the strain. A single thrower could unmake a defense platform. The formation had 11,000 of them. They all fired at once. For a moment, the gray ship vanished inside a sphere of converging fire so bright that the smoldering world below cast a second set of shadows. Iru Sen shielded her eyes. On the deck around her, benders and technicians who had served the Ordinate their whole lives leaned toward the viewports with a hunger that frightened her, the hunger of people who needed, very badly, to watch the impossible thing die. The fire ended, the light faded, the gray ship was still there. Not damaged, not scorched. The 11,000 slugs of collapsed probability had reached it, and at the last instant before each one struck, The gray ship had simply decided that the slug had missed. Iru Sen understood now, fully, in the cold and total way that she would understand it for the rest of her short life. The veil bent the future toward themselves. The gray ship did not bend anything. It chose. It looked at the 11,000 certainties the formation had thrown at it, and where the veil would have argued with each one, twisted it, redirected it, the gray ship had simply said no, and the universe had agreed. You could not out-trick a thing that did not negotiate. The veil's entire art was negotiation. They were the finest hagglers in the history of the galaxy, and they had just met a customer who did not haggle. Far below the battle, on the surface of Tamen Reach, the conquered watched the sky. They were a soft people, the Tamen. They had no warships left. The Veil had unmade their 3 platforms in the first hour. For 19 hours they had sat under occupation in the particular numb silence of a civilization that has been swallowed whole and has not yet decided whether to grieve. Their leaders had signed the surrender they were given. Their children had been told that the gray strangers in the sky now owned the names of everything. And then, near the end of the second day, the sky had filled with light, and the soft people of Tamen Reach had come out of their homes and looked up, expecting the final punishment, expecting the Veil to make an example of them as the conquerors made examples of everyone. Instead, they watched the Veil formation come apart. They did not understand what they were seeing. They had no lattice sense. They could not feel the folds collapsing or the resonant chambers going dark. What they saw was simpler and stranger. They saw 900 ships of the empire that owned their world begin, one by one, to stop, to hang dead in the sky, to drift, and they saw, moving among them, a single gray shape that did not stop, that did not drift, that went from ship to ship, like something walking through a field at dusk, putting out lamps. The soft people of Tamen Reach did not know its name. They would learn it later. For now they only knew that something had come into their sky that the Veil could not stop, and that it was unmaking the unmakeable, and a sound went up across the conquered cities that the Tamen language did not have a clean word for, because it was grief and terror, and the first thin edge of a hope so dangerous that none of them dared to say it out loud. The gray ship moved. It did not fold. It came forward on engines, burning real light, and the simple physical honesty of it was somehow the most terrifying thing yet. It was not sneaking. It was not appearing behind them. It was coming straight down the throat of the formation in plain sight, daring them to do something about it, and they had already tried everything they had. All ships, scatter the formation, said Veil Undrail. Do not let it pick us off in a line. Spread, surround, make it choose between targets. The formation scattered. 900 ships blossomed outward from the gray ship's path like a flower opening, and for one breath, Iru Sen allowed herself to hope, because surely no single ship could face 900 firing from 900 directions at once. Surely the trick of saying no had a limit. Surely it could only say no to so many things at the same time. The gray ship reached the heart of the scattered formation, and it answered her question. It said no to all of them. The unclassifiable ports along its flanks were not on its flanks only. They ran along its spine, its belly, its prow, its stern, 1,000 ports, 2,000, and they all opened together, and the gray ship reached out in every direction at once, and began, methodically, to uncollapse the Veil Ordnance. It did not destroy the ships. That was the part Iru Sen could never make anyone understand. Later, in the time she had left, it did not blow them apart. It reached into each Veil vessel's resonant chamber, the heart that let it bend space, and it made that chamber certain. It decided, for each ship, that the ship could no longer fold. And a Veil warship that cannot fold is a Veil warship that has forgotten how to do the only thing it was ever truly good at. Across the scattered formation, 200 resonant chambers went dark in 11 seconds. Then, 400. The ships did not die. They simply became blind, deaf, ordinary metal boxes full of the most arrogant crews in the galaxy, suddenly unable to step out of space, suddenly stuck in the one place they actually were, fully visible, fully real, fully there. It was unmaking them by making them honest. There was a young bender named Karan on the cruiser Threadwell, far out on the scattered edge of the formation, and his last 9 seconds of usefulness to the Ordinate were spent screaming a warning that no one needed and no one could act on. He saw the wave of certainty roll outward from the gray ship. He saw the resonant chambers of the ships nearer the center go dark one rank at a time, like lamps being snuffed by a hand moving down a hall. He had time to understand that the hand would reach the Threadwell. He did not have time to do anything about it. His captain ordered an emergency fold, the deepest the cruiser could manage, a desperate leap to anywhere but here. The resonant chamber began to bend, and the gray ship, 800 kilometers away, dealing with 400 other ships at the same moment, reached out and made the Threadwell's fold certain before it opened. The cruiser did not move. The cruiser would never move under its own folding again. Karan sat at a dead lattice and listened to the sudden, total silence where the song of folded space had been his whole life, and he wept, because he was 22 years old, and he had just learned that the universe had a master, and it was not the veil. The thing the gray ship was doing had a shape, and Iru Sen was the only one calm enough to see it. It was not striking out at random. It was working in from the edges, taking the fold from the outermost ships first, sealing the formation against escape before it turned inward toward the prizes at the center. It was the move a hunter makes when it has decided that none of the prey will get away, and it would rather take its time. The Veil had made that exact move 1,000 times against 1,000 worlds. They were experts at the slow closing of an inescapable net. They knew, better than any species alive, exactly what it felt like to be on the wrong side of one, because they had put so many others there. The lattice on the surviving cruisers tried, frantically, to find a pattern in the gray ship's choices that could be exploited. Every Veil victory in 2,000 years had been built on finding the one thread of probability the enemy had left loose and pulling it. There was always a loose thread. The art of the Ordinate was finding it. The benders of the scattered formation cast and cast and cast, hunting for the gray ship's loose thread, the assumption it had failed to nail down, the future it had not bothered to close. There was no loose thread. The gray ship had closed every future before the battle began. That was what the cloak had been for. Those 19 hours of watching the conquest, of counting the formation, of letting the Veil take Tamman Reach and feel safe. That had been the gray ship closing every thread one at a time, patiently, while the Ordinate congratulated itself on a clean conquest. By the time it chose to be real, there was nothing left to exploit. The battle had been over before the Veil knew it had begun. Everything happening now was simply the universe getting around to admitting it. Prime, Iru Sen said, it is not killing us. I can see that, he snapped. You do not understand what I am telling you. It could kill us. It chose not to. It is taking the fold from us instead. It is leaving the crews alive inside ships that can no longer fight. She looked at him, and her face had gone the color of ash. It wants witnesses, Prime. It is doing this where the whole Eastern Arm is watching, and it is leaving thousands of us alive on purpose, so that we can tell the rest. Veil Andrael said nothing. On the great curved viewport, the gray ship turned its prow, at last, toward the hollow crown. The flagship of the third expansion was the largest object the Veil had ever built. It was 4 kilometers of layered resonant lattice, the most heavily folded vessel in existence, capable of bending not just its own position, but the position of everything within 100 kilometers of it. It had a name that the conquered world spoke only in whispers. It had never been touched in battle. It was, the Veil believed, the single most dangerous machine in the galaxy. It was 11 kilometers shorter than the gray ship coming toward it. Forecaster Sen, said Veil Andrael, and his voice had changed. The brittle calm had cracked, and underneath it was something she had never heard from him. It was the sound of a man asking a question he should have asked an hour ago. Where did it come from? We held the whole volume. The lattice mapped every fold route into this system for 9 hours before the conquest. Nothing came in. It did not fold here. It did not fly here. It was simply, at a certain moment, here. So I am asking you, As my forecaster, the only honest question left: where did it come from? Iru Sen had been asking herself the same thing since the lattice first lied to her, and she had an answer now, and she hated it. It did not come from anywhere, Prime, she said. We have been thinking of it as a ship that hid. It is not a ship that hid. It is a ship that decided not to be here for as long as it suited it, and then decided to be here when that suited it instead. The lattice never saw it arrive because, as far as the universe is concerned, it never arrived. It was always going to be here. It simply hadn't gotten around to it. She swallowed. It has been here the entire conquest, Prime. It watched us take Tame and Reach. It watched us unmake the 3 platforms. It led us. It was waiting to count us. And the moment the whole 3rd expansion was gathered in one orbit, it decided to be real. That is not possible. You keep saying that word. Iru Sen laughed, and the laugh frightened her more than anything yet, because she had not chosen to make it. Prime, every alien we ever conquered said that word about us. Impossible. The Veil cannot fold a whole strike group into a sealed orbit. The Veil cannot take a world before the alarms finish. Impossible, impossible, and then they were ours. We taught the galaxy that the word impossible is just the noise a thing makes right before the ordinate proves it wrong. She turned and looked at the gray hull filling the viewport. Something out there learned the lesson better than we did, and it has come to give us our examination. Vile Undrail was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the bridge of the Hollow Crown was the only calm place left in the formation, an island of disciplined terror, benders standing at their stations doing the work of an empire that had 30 more minutes of being an empire and did not yet know it. The Prime watched the gray ship work its way through his fleet, watched the lamps of his cruisers go dark one by one, and Iru Sen saw something move behind his ancient eyes that she had never expected to see there. It was arithmetic. He was counting what was left. He was a creature built entirely out of advantage, and for the first time in his very long life he was trying to find the advantage, and discovering that there was none, and the discovery was rearranging his whole understanding of himself. We have 140 ships at the far edge that still hold their folds, he said at last. If I order them to flee now, before it reaches them, some will escape. They will carry the warning. The 3rd expansion will be broken, but the Ordinate will survive to answer this. Order them to flee, Iru Sen said, and leave the rest of us. Yes. She did not soften it. There was no time left for softening. Order them to flee, Prime. It is the one correct decision still available to you. Make it before the gray ship makes it impossible. Vale Andrael gave the order. 140 Vale warships on the far edge of the dying formation lit their resonant chambers and reached for a fold, a coordinated leap out of the system, the largest single fold the 3rd expansion had attempted in a decade. For one heartbeat, Iru Sen allowed herself to believe it would work. The gray ship was at the center of the formation, 1,100 kilometers away, occupied with sealing 100 ships at once. Surely even it could not reach the far edge in time. Surely there was a limit. Surely the word no had a range. The 140 ships began to fold. The gray ship, without turning, without pausing in its work at the center, said no. All 140 folds went certain in the same instant. Not one ship moved. They hung at the edge of the system, their resonant chambers dark, exactly as visible and exactly as trapped as the rest, and the warning the Prime had tried to send did not leave the orbit of Tame and Reach. There was no range. That was the answer to the last question worth asking. The word no did not weaken with distance. It did not weaken with numbers. The gray ship could say it to one ship or to 140 ships at the edge of a star system while sealing 100 more at the center, and every no landed with the same total weight because it was not a weapon being fired across space. It was a decision being made about the universe, and a decision does not get tired, and a decision does not run out of range. Vale Andrael lowered himself slowly into the command seat of the Hollow Crown. He had not sat in it during the whole conquest. Prime stood to remind the crew that the Ordinate never rested. He sat now. He folded his old hands in his lap. I have one move left, Forecaster, he said. The Hollow Crown fired. It threw everything. It was the flagship. It had weapons the lesser ships did not. Deep lattice throwers that did not merely make a target be in the wrong place, but undecided the target's existence at the root, that reached down past position and momentum into the bare fact of a thing and erased the fact. These weapons had been used 4 times in the history of the Ordinate, and 4 worlds were no longer in any star chart because of them. The Hollow Crown turned all of them on the gray ship and pulled the root out of the universe in a cone aimed straight at the Aegis Unbroken. Irusen felt the casting in her teeth. Half the bridge crew collapsed from the strain of channeling it. The viewport went perfectly black as the weapons reached past light itself to erase the fact of the gray ship from the record of existence. And the gray ship said no. The blackness cleared. The Aegis Unbroken was unchanged, except that now, along its prow, a single one of its 1,000 ports had swiveled to point directly back down the path the Hollow Crown's deep lattice weapons had traveled. "Brace," Irusen whispered. She did not know why she said it. There was no bracing for what was coming, but she had spent 40 years giving the ship instructions, and her mouth gave one last one out of habit. "Brace, brace, it is going to answer." The gray ship answered. It did not erase the Hollow Crown. It would have been a mercy if it had. Instead, the single port flared, and out of it came the gray ship's reply. And the reply was a certainty so total that Irusen's lattice sense went white. She felt the future of the flagship arrive, all at once, the future she had touched at the very beginning, the future of the Hollow Crown coming apart, and she understood that the gray ship was not predicting that future. It was delivering it. The flagship's resonant lattice, the 4 kilometers of layered space bending that made it the most dangerous machine the Veil had ever built, went certain. Every fold in it collapsed at once. Every bent meter of space snapped straight. The Hollow Crown was a ship built almost entirely out of folded space. Take the folds away all at once, and what remained could not hold itself together, because most of it had never been quite where it appeared to be. The flagship did not explode. It unfolded. 4 kilometers of impossible architecture became, in a single grinding instant, the much smaller and much simpler thing it had actually always been underneath the bending, and that smaller thing could not survive being suddenly true. The bridge tore loose from the spine. Irusen was thrown against the cracked viewport and held there by her own failing weight as the great machine came apart around her exactly the way she had seen it would. Atmosphere screamed out into the void. Half the bridge was simply gone, unfolded into a place it could no longer reach. And in the middle of the dying, on the deck, Vial Andrael, prime of the 3rd expansion, oldest bender of the lattice, dragged himself to the broken viewport and looked out at the gray ship, and Irusen heard him say the only thing he had left to say. "What are you?" The translation engines, which had finally finished their work, chose that moment to render the second line on the gray ship's prow, the small hard word below the name. They put it on every surviving screen across the entire 3rd expansion at once, 200,000 Veil reading it in the same instant. The word was no. It was not an answer to the Prime's question. It had never been an answer to a question. It was the only thing the gray ship had ever said, the only thing it had come all this way to say, and it had now said it to the most powerful war formation in the eastern arm of the galaxy, and the formation had heard it. The Hollow Crown finished coming apart. Irusen did not die with it. She would not understand why for some time. She was thrown clear in a sealed section of bridge, a bubble of intact deck spinning out into the dark, and as it spun, she caught one last glimpse of the gray ship through the cracked viewport, and the gray ship was looking at her bubble. She felt it look at her. She felt the same patient attention that had counted the formation before it chose to be real, and she understood that the gray ship had decided she would live, the same way it had decided the slugs would miss, and the flagship would unfold. It was choosing its witnesses. She thought, as she fell, about the Prime's last question. What are you? She had heard 1,000 conquered creatures ask the Veil that same question in that same tone, and she had never once felt sorry for them, because the asking had always meant the same thing. It meant the asker had run out of every other thing to say. It meant defeat had arrived so completely that the only response left was a kind of awe. The Veil had collected that question like a trophy from 40 worlds. And now the Prime of the third expansion had asked it of the Grey Ship, in the last seconds of the flagship's life, and the Grey Ship had not even bothered to answer, because the answer did not matter. The answer never mattered. The only thing that mattered was the no, and the no had already been delivered. The bubble of bridge tumbled toward the smoldering world below, and forecaster Iru Sen, the only person aboard the Hollow Crown who had understood the truth from the first lie of the lattice, fell toward Taman Reach, clutching that truth, like the only warm thing in a cold universe. Above her, the Grey Ship turned away from the wreck of the flagship and began, with terrible patience, to move through the rest of the scattered formation, going from ship to ship, taking the fold from each one, leaving the crews alive and blind and honest. And Iru Sen knew, falling, that the Veil Ordinate had just stopped being inevitable, and that the thing which had taken inevitability away from them had not even finished telling them why. The warning that the Prime had failed to send went out anyway. It went out from the conquered. The soft people of Taman Reach had no warships and no lattice, but they had radio, the patient old radio of a young civilization, and they pointed it at the sky, and they shouted the thing they had seen to anyone who would listen. The Veil had taught the galaxy to fear them by being silent and sudden. The Taman broke that silence with the most dangerous transmission the Eastern Arm had heard in 2,000 years. It was not a battle report, it was a description. 900 ships of the Veil Ordinate, stopped. One Grey Ship, unstoppable. A word on its prow that even the conquered now understood. The transmission reached the second expansion's border fleet 11 hours later, traveling at the slow, honest speed of light, because the Grey Ship had not bothered to stop it. By then, the rumor had already overtaken the message. Folded couriers carry news faster than light, and 100 of them had slipped out of nearby systems carrying the same impossible story, and the story changed in the telling, the way all stories do, except that this story got worse instead of better, because the truth was already as bad as a story could be, and the tellers had no need to exaggerate. In the war court of the second expansion, the Prime Regent Veil Tomar Saroon listened to the report with the particular stillness of a creature that has just felt the floor of the universe shift under it. "The third expansion is gone," said her forecaster, an old male named Eshk who had served 3 primes and never once delivered a casting like this one. "Not destroyed. That is the part I cannot make the court understand. The ships still exist. The crews still live. But the fold has been taken from all of them. 900 vessels sit in the orbit of Taman Reach as ordinary metal, unable to bend a single meter of space. The third expansion is not dead, Regent. It has been made mortal, which, for the Veil, is the same as dead. And the ship that did it? Gone. It finished its work, and then it stopped being real again, the same way it started. It is somewhere, Regent. It is always somewhere, but the lattice cannot find it, and I do not believe it wishes to be found until it chooses the next place to be." Tomar Saroon rose from the regent's seat. She was younger than the Prime of the third expansion had been, sharper, and she had built her whole career on the belief that the Ordinate's troubles came from old benders growing slow and proud. She had said, more than once, that the third expansion had gotten careless. She had been planning, in fact, to say it again at the next conclave, to use the conquest of Taman Reach as an example of how the old guard squandered the Ordinate's gifts. She did not feel like saying it now. "Show me the word," she said. Eshk put it on the great lattice of the war court, the Grey Ship's prow, the name the engines rendered as Aegis Unbroken, and below it, the single hard word that the third expansion had read in its dying. "No," said the regent, reading it aloud, and the word felt strange in her mouth, because she had spent her whole life on the giving end of it. The Veil said no to the galaxy. The galaxy did not say no to the Veil. That was the entire arrangement. That was 2,000 years of folded space, and clean conquests, and worlds surrendering before the alarms finished sounding. The arrangement had a shape, and the shape had just been turned inside out, and the regent of the second expansion stood in her war court and felt the inside-out shape settle over her like cold water. "Find out what it is," she said, "before it finds us. I will not wait in orbit to be counted the way Drael did. Eshka, I want every forecaster in the second expansion casting at once. I want the deepest reach we have ever attempted. I do not care what it costs. Find me the gray ship. Find me where it came from. Find me one single thread of it I can pull. There is always a thread. The third expansion was careless. We will not be." Eshk did not tell her that the third expansion had said the same thing about the second, once, long ago. He simply bowed and went to do the impossible thing she had ordered, because that was what one did in the Ordinate when a regent gave an order, even an order that could not be obeyed. For 9 days the forecasters of the second expansion cast into the dark, hunting the gray ship, and for 9 days they found nothing, because there was nothing to find. You cannot pull a thread on a thing that has no loose threads. You cannot predict the future of a thing that decides its own. The casting cost them. 2 forecasters died of the strain. 4 more were carried from their lattices with blood on their faces, and their minds gone soft, and they never cast again. The second expansion spent the lives of its best benders trying to see a ship that did not want to be seen, and at the end of 9 days the only thing they had learned was the one thing they could not bear to know. The gray ship was not hunting the Veil. It did not need to. The Veil came to it. Wherever the Ordinate went, the gray ship was already going to be there, in the way that a wall is already going to be there when you walk into it in the dark. It was not chasing the Empire across the eastern arm. It was simply, patiently, present at every place the Empire intended to be, waiting to be real, the same way it had waited in the orbit of Taman Reach. The Veil could not flee it, because there was nowhere to flee to that the gray ship had not already decided to also be. The Veil were not the only Empire watching. The eastern arm was wide, and the Ordinate had never been alone in it. It had merely been the worst. There were others. There was the Castle Compact, a federation of 9 species that had spent 3 centuries building walls against the Veil and had never once dared to strike at them. There was the Hadrek throne, a single brutal dynasty that ruled 40 systems coreward and had a standing arrangement with the Ordinate, a careful border, a mutual agreement to devour smaller things and leave each other be. And there were others further out, smaller powers, patient powers, all of them watching the same impossible reports trickle in from the orbit of Taman Reach, all of them doing the same arithmetic. The Castle Compact did the arithmetic and reached a sensible conclusion. They had spent 300 years afraid of the Ordinate, and now the Ordinate was being unmade, and a sensible federation does not throw itself into the path of the thing unmaking its oldest enemy. The Compact closed its borders, recalled its fleets, sent no provocation toward the gray ship and no aid toward the Veil, and waited. It was the correct decision. It was, in fact, the decision the gray ship would have wanted any reasonable power to make, and so the Castle Compact survived the age of the gray ship untouched, and never understood how close it had come to a different fate, and never knew that its survival had been a kind of grade on an examination it did not know it was taking. The Hadrek throne did the arithmetic and reached a different conclusion. The throne was old and proud and hungry, and it looked at the dying Ordinate and saw not a warning but a feast. 40 systems of Veil worlds, suddenly mortal, suddenly fold-blind, suddenly defenseless, ripe for the taking by anyone bold enough to move while the conquerors choked on their own punishment. The dynast of the Hadrek throne, a creature named Sorvel Hadrek, who had eaten 3 rival dynasts to reach his seat, gathered his war fleet and folded coreward toward the nearest cluster of broken Veil worlds, intending to harvest them, intending to grow fat on the carcass of the Ordinate, intending to inherit the eastern arm the moment the gray ship finished clearing it. He found the gray ship waiting at the first world. Sorvel Hadrek was not a forecaster. He had no lattice, no casting, no way to feel the wrongness that Iru Sen had felt in her bones. He had only his eyes, and his eyes told him that a scarred gray hull 11 kilometers long hung in orbit above the broken Veil world he had come to harvest, and that it had a name he could not read, and a single small word beneath it that his translation engines rendered in the instant his fleet arrived. He read the word, He did not understand, at first, that it was meant for him. He thought it was a leftover, a thing the gray ship had said to the Veil, none of his concern. He ordered his fleet to descend on the world and take it. The gray ship had never once spoken to the Hadrek throne. It owed the throne nothing, had no quarrel with it, had not come to the Eastern Arm to answer it. But the throne had just done, in plain sight, the exact thing the gray ship had crossed the galaxy to answer. It had looked at a conquered and defenseless people and seen a feast. It had told the dark that it was inevitable. It had asked the question. And the gray ship, which had no want and no quarrel, and no reason to care about the Hadrek throne at all, turned its prow toward Sorvel Hadrek's war fleet and gave the only answer it had ever given anyone. The throne's fleet had no folds to lose. The Hadrek did not bend space the way the Veil did, so the gray ship did not take their folds. It found, instead, whatever the throne's ships used in place of folding, the deep, brutal engines that hurled them between stars, and it made those engines certain, decided for each ship that it had already arrived nowhere, and the Hadrek war fleet that had come to inherit the Eastern Arm found that it could no longer leave the orbit of a single broken Veil world. 40 ships of the throne, stranded, blind, alive, drifting above a world they had come to feast on, while the people of that world, the mortal Veil the throne had come to devour, watched their would-be conquerors join them in helplessness. Sorvel Hadrek stood on the bridge of his stranded flagship and read the small word beneath the gray ship's name again, and understood, far too late, that it had been meant for him after all. It had been meant for everyone. It was not a thing the gray ship said to the Veil. It was a thing the gray ship said to anyone who asked the question, and the throne had asked it, loudly, in the worst possible place, at the worst possible time, in front of the only audience that mattered. The Hadrek throne did not fall the way the Ordinate fell. It was too far coreward, too dispersed, and only its war fleet had come within reach of the gray ship. But its war fleet did not come home, and the story of why it did not come home reached the throne's 40 systems and did to them what Iru Sen's message would soon do to the second expansion. The dynast's grip loosened. The worlds the throne had eaten began to remember that they had once been free. And the Hadrek throne spent the next decade learning, the hard, slow way, the same lesson the Veil had learned in a single afternoon, which was that the age of asking the dark to kneel was over, because something in the dark had learned to answer. That was the thing the surviving empires of the Eastern Arm would say to each other, in the strange new age that came after, when they tried to make sense of what the gray ship had been. Every empire that saw it regretted it. The ones that struck at it regretted it within the hour. The ones that tried to feast on its work regretted it within the day. And even the ones that did the sensible thing, that closed their borders and stayed their hands and survived, regretted it too, in a quieter way, for the rest of their long, careful histories, because they had seen the shape of the thing in the dark, and they knew it had not gone far, and they knew it was patient, and they knew it was listening, and they could never again be quite as certain of anything as they had been before the gray ship uncloaked. On the 10th day, the second expansion received a message. It did not come from the gray ship. The gray ship never sent messages. The gray ship had only ever said one word, and it said that word with deeds. The message came from Iru Sen. She was alive. The bubble of bridge had fallen through the upper atmosphere of Taman Reach, and the soft people had pulled her from the wreck with their soft, careful hands, and they had not unmade her or made an example of her, because they were not the Veil, and they had asked her, the first Veil any of them had ever spoken to face, what the gray ship was. And Iru Sen, who had understood the truth from the first lie of the lattice, had told them, and then she had asked them to lend her their patient old radio, because she had something to say to the rest of the Ordinate, and the Taman had let her, which was either the kindest thing or the cruelest thing anyone had ever done for the Veil, and even Iru Sen could not decide which. Her message reached the war court of the second expansion on the 10th day. The regent had it played in full, before the entire court, because she did not yet understand what it would do to them. "This is forecaster Iru Sen of the third expansion," the message began. "I survived the unmaking of the Hollow Crown. I am the last casting officer of the third expansion, and I am sending this from the surface of Taman Reach, a world we conquered, among people we conquered, who pulled me from a wreck they had every reason to leave me dying in. I am telling you that, Regent Saroon, because you need to understand who showed me mercy and who did not, and you need to understand that it was not us. I have spent 10 days thinking about the gray ship, and I know now what it is, and I am going to tell you, and you are not going to want to hear it. It is us, Regent. It is what we told the galaxy we were. For 2,000 years we said we were inevitable. We said the future belonged to us. We said the word no was ours to give and never to receive. We made the galaxy believe it. And somewhere out in the dark, something heard us say it, and instead of kneeling, it went away, and it thought about it, and it decided to become the true version of the thing we only pretended to be. We bent the future. It chose the future. We were the most powerful liars the galaxy ever produced. The gray ship is the truth we were lying about. Come back to collect. You are going to cast for its weakness. You are going to spend your best benders looking for the thread to pull. I spent the last casting of my career looking for it. And there is no thread, Regent, because we taught it not to leave one. Everything it did to us, it did out of our own playbook. The slow net, the sealing of escape, the leaving of witnesses, the single word. It learned the veil better than the veil ever learned themselves, and it has come to give the lesson back. Do not fight it. I am not telling you that to save the gray ship. The gray ship does not need saving. I am telling you that to save the only thing about us worth saving, which is the chance, the very small chance, that we stop being the thing the gray ship came to answer before it has answered all of us. That is the whole message. There is nothing else. There is no plan in here, no weapon, no thread. I gave you the truth instead, which is the one thing the Ordinate has never once given anyone. Consider it my last casting. Send out. The message ended. The war court of the second expansion was silent for a long time. Then the Regent did the thing that primes do, the thing that had made the Veil what they were, the thing that Iru Sen had begged them not to do. She refused the truth. She stood in her war court, with the wreck of the third expansion still cooling in the orbit of a conquered world, with the last forecaster of that expansion begging her across the void to stop, and Tomar Saroon, Prime Regent of the second expansion, lifted her chin and said the thing that the Veil always said. She has been broken, the Regent told her court. She fell from the hollow crown, and the fall took her nerve, and the conquered have filled her broken head with their soft ideas. She is not a forecaster anymore. She is a defeated creature, making the noise that defeated creatures make. We will not listen to it. She turned to Eshk. The third expansion was careless and old, and it walked its whole fleet into a single orbit and let itself be counted. We will not be careless. We will not gather. We will hunt the gray ship the way we hunt everything, in pieces, from 1,000 directions, never giving it a single formation to swallow. Disperse the second expansion across 40 systems. Make us impossible to count, and when we find it, we will take it apart one fold at a time, the way we have taken apart everything else that ever told the Ordinate no. It was, Eshk thought, watching his Regent, a very good plan. It was clever, and it was bold, and it learned the right lesson from the death of the third expansion. Do not gather, do not be counted. Force the gray ship to face the Veil. In scattered pieces it could not swallow whole. It was a very good plan, and it was exactly, precisely, the plan that the gray ship had been waiting 2,000 years for the Veil to make. Because the gray ship had never needed them to gather. Gathering had only ever been a convenience, a courtesy the third expansion had paid it. The gray ship did not care whether the Veil came as one formation or as 40 scattered pieces, because it did not have to find them, because it was already going to be wherever they decided to be, and scattering across 40 systems simply meant that the Aegis Unbroken would now have 40 places it had already decided to be real. Eshk understood this. He was a forecaster. He could not help but understand it. He stood in the war court and watched his Regent give the order that Iru Sen had begged her not to give, the order to disperse, the order to hunt, the order that turned the entire second expansion into 40 separate invitations, and he opened his mouth to say so. And then he closed it, because he had served 3 primes, and he knew the one thing about the veil that no casting ever taught and no lattice ever showed, the thing that was about to unmake the second expansion as surely as it had unmade the third. He knew that the ordinate could not stop. It was built out of advantage, the way the hollow crown had been built out of folded space, and it could no more choose to stop being the conqueror than the flagship could choose not to unfold once the certainty took it. The Regent was not going to listen to Iru Sen. No Veil Prime had ever, in 2,000 years, listened to the word no. That was the whole problem. That had always been the whole problem. And the Gray Ship knew it, and the Gray Ship was counting on it, and the Gray Ship had all the time in the universe to wait for the Veil to be exactly what the Veil had always been. Eshk closed his mouth and bowed to his regent, and went to disperse the second expansion across 40 systems. 40 systems was 40 places the Gray Ship had already decided to be. The first one was 11 days away. The first system the second expansion scattered into was called Orun's Gate, and the Veil cruiser Patient Edge folded into it expecting nothing. It found the Gray Ship waiting. The Aegis Unbroken was simply there, holding station above the empty fourth planet, the way it was always simply there, and the captain of the Patient Edge had 8 seconds to make the choice that Iru Sen had begged the whole ordinate to make. He could flee. He could turn his cruiser and fold back out and carry the warning that the Gray Ship had reached Orun's Gate first, that the dispersal had failed before it began, that the Regent's clever plan was already a corpse. He had 8 seconds and the fold ready, and the choice was his. He attacked. He was Veil. He could not help it. He fired his throwers and reached for the Gray Ship's resonant chamber the way the third expansion had, and the Gray Ship said no, and the Patient Edge's fold went certain, and it sat in the orbit of Orun's Gate as ordinary metal, blind and honest and alive, exactly like 900 others before it. The Gray Ship had not even moved. It had spent perhaps 1/10 of its attention. The rest of it remained, as far as Iru Sen could ever determine, simply present, waiting, in the patient way of a thing that has nowhere it needs to be because it is already everywhere it intends to be. This happened in 11 systems over the next 6 days. The second expansion scattered, and into each system it scattered, the Gray Ship was already there, and the Veil, being Veil, attacked, and the Gray Ship said no, and another piece of the ordinate became mortal. The dispersal had not made the Empire impossible to count. It had only spread the counting out across 40 systems, so that the ordinate could die in pieces instead of all at once, which was somehow worse, because each piece died fresh, each captain making the same choice in the same 8 seconds, each one choosing the attack, each one proving Iru Sen right and the Regent wrong, over and over, in system after system, until the whole eastern arm of the galaxy was littered with dead Veil cruisers that still had living crews aboard them, drifting, blind, telling the story to anyone who would listen. And the story spread. This was the thing the Gray Ship had wanted, Iru Sen realized, watching from the surface of Taman Reach as the reports trickled in over the patient old radio of the conquered. The Gray Ship had not killed the crews because dead crews tell no stories. It had taken the fold and left them alive precisely so that the galaxy would fill with living Veil who had seen the Gray Ship say no and could speak of nothing else. The Veil had conquered the eastern arm with fear. The Gray Ship was reconquering it with a different fear, a deeper one, the fear of the conquerors themselves, and it was using the Ordinate's own survivors to carry it. The worlds the Veil had taken began to stir. Taman Reach was first, because Taman Reach had Iru Sen, and Iru Sen had told them the truth. The soft people took down the gray banners of the Ordinate that the conquest had hung over their cities, and they did it carefully, almost gently, the way you take down something you are no longer afraid of, but have not yet learned to hate. Other worlds heard. A conquered moon in the Saroon Reach put out a transmission of its own, a folded courier from a world the Veil had taken 60 years ago, a world that had been the Ordinates the way a stone is the grounds, sent a single sentence into the dark, and the sentence was the Gray Ship's word, and the world that sent it was not punished, because the expansion that owned it was busy dying in 11 other systems. The Regent saw it happening, and she did the only thing the Veil knew how to do. She doubled the conquest. She ordered the dispersed pieces of the second expansion that still held their folds to stop hunting the gray ship and start crushing the stirring worlds, to remind the galaxy who its master was, to drown the new fear in the old one. It was, Eshk thought, exactly the wrong move, and exactly the move the Veil would always make, and exactly the move the gray ship was waiting for. Because when the surviving Veil cruisers turned away from the gray ship and toward the stirring worlds, the gray ship followed them, not by chasing, by being there. The cruiser that folded to a rebellious moon to make an example of it found the Aegis unbroken already in orbit. Between the cruiser and the moon, a gray wall of refusal 3 kilometers wide, and the example was not made. The cruiser that folded to a world to crush its transmission found the gray ship there too, and the transmission went on, and a second world heard it and joined. The gray ship was not defending the worlds, exactly. It never spoke to them, never answered their transmissions, never acknowledged the gratitude that began, tentatively, to rise toward it from 100 conquered places. It simply put itself between the Veil and everything the Veil tried to do, and it said no, and slowly, system by system, the entire architecture of the Ordinate's power came apart, not through battle, but through the simple fact that the Veil could no longer make anyone afraid of them, because there was now a thing in the galaxy that the Veil themselves were afraid of, and fear does not flow uphill. On the surface of Taman Reach, a delegation came to Iru Sen. They were not Taman. They had come from 3 worlds away, a folded courier's worth of envoys from a species the Veil had conquered 40 years ago, and they had heard that a Veil forecaster lived among the soft people, and had told them the truth of the gray ship, and they had come to ask her a question that no conquered creature had ever been able to ask a Veil before. "Will it stop?" their speaker asked. "When the Ordinate is broken, when the last fold is taken and the last expansion is made mortal, will the gray ship stop, or will it do to the galaxy what the Veil did? We have traded one inevitable thing for another. We need to know what the new master wants." Iru Sen had been thinking about this for 30 days, ever since she fell. She had cast on it, quietly, in the small hours, with the broken remnant of her lattice sense, hunting the future of the gray ship the way the Regent's forecasters had, and finding the same nothing they had found, the same closed and chosen future she could not read. But she had learned something the Regent's forecasters had not, because she had been willing to learn it, and she gave the answer now. "It does not want anything," she said. "That is the part the Regent will never understand, and it is the part that will save the galaxy if anything does. The Veil conquered because the Veil wanted. We wanted worlds, we wanted oaths, we wanted the word no to belong to us alone. Want is a thread. Want is the loosest thread there is. Every empire that ever wanted something could be predicted, could be bargained with, could be steered, because you always knew what it was reaching for. We steered 40 worlds that way. We found out what they wanted and we used it. The gray ship does not want. I have cast on it for 30 days and there is no want in it anywhere. It does not want the galaxy. It does not want worship. It does not even want revenge, though it has every right to it, and that is the strangest thing of all. It came all this way, and it broke the most powerful empire in the Eastern Arm, and when it is finished, there will be nothing it asks for. No oath, no tribute, no kneeling. It will simply stop being real, the way it started, and it will go back to wherever a thing goes, when it decides not to be anywhere, and it will leave the galaxy alone. It is not here to rule us. It is here to answer us. We asked a question 2,000 years ago when we told the galaxy we were inevitable. The gray ship is the answer, and when the answer is fully given, it will go home, because answers do not linger, only wants linger. She looked at the envoys, at their careful, hopeful, frightened faces. You did not trade one master for another. You traded a master for the absence of one. I know how strange that sounds. I am a Veil. I did not believe such a thing was possible until I watched it happen to my own people. But that is the truth, and I have spent my whole life lying, so I have learned to recognize the truth by how much it costs to say. The envoys went away to carry her words to 3 more worlds. The regent did not go away. The regent kept fighting, because the regent was Vale, and the second expansion died around her the way the third had, piece by piece, fold by fold, system by system, every cruiser making the same 8-second choice and choosing wrong. And as it died, Tomar Sarun's certainty did not break. That was the thing Eshk could never forgive her for in the end. Her certainty did not break. She watched her empire become mortal, and she remained, to the last, absolutely sure that the next system would be the one where they found the thread, where the gray ship slipped, where the Ordinate's cleverness finally caught the thing that had no want and no future and no loose end. There was one more thing the regent tried. It was the only genuinely new thing any Vale attempted in the whole long unmaking, and it came from Eshk, who proposed it not because he believed it would work, but because he could not bear to watch his people die without offering them the one idea Irusen's message had planted in him. "Regent," he said, "on the 40th day, with 11 systems left, and the second expansion 3/4 mortal, there is one thread we have not pulled. Sen named it herself, and did not see what she had named. The gray ship has no want. Very well. But it has done one thing, over and over, that it did not have to do. It has left our crews alive, every time. 900 ships at Taman Reach, 11 systems since. It takes the fold and it spares the crew, every time, without exception. Regent, a thing that truly wanted nothing, would not bother to spare anyone. Sparing is a choice. Sparing costs attention. The gray ship spares us on purpose, every single time, which means there is one thing it cares about after all." "And what is that?" the regent asked. "It cares whether we live," Eshk said. "Not because it loves us, because it wants us to see. The gray ship needs witnesses, Regent. It has needed them from the first orbit. That is its one thread. That is the only thing it reaches for. And a thing that needs witnesses can be denied witnesses." He drew a breath, and he hated himself for the next words, and he said them anyway, because he was Vale, and could not stop being Vale any more than his regent could. If we stop fleeing, stop fighting, stop surviving, if the next 11 systems give the gray ship nothing to spare, no crew to leave alive, no story to spread, then we deny it the one thing it has wanted. We take its witnesses away. We make it shout no into an empty room. The regent looked at her oldest forecaster for a long moment. "You are proposing," she said slowly, "that the second expansion choose to die, truly die, so that the gray ship cannot have the satisfaction of letting us live." "I am proposing," Eshk said, "the one thing the gray ship has never seen a Vale do. It has learned us better than we know ourselves. It knows we will always fight, always flee, always survive to spread the fear. It has built everything on that. So we do the one thing it cannot predict, because we have never once done it. We refuse to be its witnesses. We deny it the story. It is the only no left to us, Regent. It is the only no the Ordinate has ever had the courage to say." It was, Eshk thought, watching the Regent's face, the best idea he had ever had, and the worst, and the only one left. And it would have worked, perhaps. It was the one move that might have cost the gray ship something. It was the one thread, the single place where the thing that wanted nothing wanted one small thing after all. The regent refused it, not because it was wrong, because she was Vale, and a Vale does not choose to die, and a Vale does not deny herself the chance to win, and a Vale, faced with the one move that might cost the enemy something, could not make that move if it cost the Vale more. Tomar Sarun would spend her whole expansion fighting a war she could not win, but she would not spend a single ship choosing to lose, even to deny the enemy its prize. The want that Irusen had named was in the regent too, the want to survive, the want to win, the loosest thread of all. "We fight," the regent said. "We do not lie down. Disperse what is left. We will find the thread." Eshk bowed, because he was Vale. And the gray ship, in 11 systems at once, waited, because it already knew what the regent would choose, because it had learned the Veil better than the Veil had ever learned themselves, and the one move that might have cost it something was the one move the Veil would never, ever make. The second expansion fell over the next 11 days, and the gray ship never once raised its pace. That was the detail that broke the survivors more than any weapon could have. The Aegis Unbroken was not in a hurry. It moved from system to system at the speed of a thing with all the time in the universe, taking the fold from the last cruisers of the second expansion, the way a person walks a familiar road, without urgency, without effort, without any sign that it considered the death of an empire to be a difficult day's work. The Veil had conquered the eastern arm in a fever of speed and suddenness. The gray ship unmade them at a walk. The regent died last. Not killed, the gray ship killed no one, had killed no one since the orbit of Taman Reach, where the Hollow Crown's unfolding had been the only deaths in the entire war that the gray ship had actually caused, and even those it had caused only by giving the flagship back its own future. Tomar Saroon's command cruiser was the final ship of the second expansion to hold its fold, and it folded, at the very end, not to flee and not to fight, but to reach the gray ship, to come close, to look at the thing that had unmade her empire with her own eyes before it took her fold like all the others. The gray ship let her come. She stood at her viewport, prime regent of a dead expansion, and she looked at the Aegis Unbroken across 9 kilometers of empty space, at the scarred gray hull and the unreadable name and the small hard word beneath it, and Eshk, beside her, watched her search the gray ship for the want that would let her bargain with it, the thread that would let her steer it, the fear that would let her threaten it, and find none of those things because they were not there, because the gray ship was the one thing in the galaxy that the Veil had no leverage over at all. "Cast on it, Eshk," she said quietly. "One last time. Tell me its future. Tell me where it goes when this is done. Give me one thread to die holding." Eshk cast. He put the last of his strength into it, the way Irusen had at the very beginning, the way 2 forecasters of the second expansion had died doing. He drove a thread at the gray ship, and for one instant, the same instant Irusen had touched, the thread caught, and Eshk saw. He did not see the gray ship's future. He saw its past. It was only a fragment, a single image torn loose from the closed and chosen thing the gray ship was, and Eshk would spend the rest of his short life trying to understand it. He saw a small world, far away, on the other side of the galaxy, a blue world, and he saw it under a sky full of ships, and the ships were not the gray ships. The ships belonged to something else, something that had come to that small blue world, long ago, the way the Veil came to Taman Reach, certain and sudden and inevitable. And he saw that the small blue world had said no, not with weapons, at first. With the simple, stubborn, impossible word, the same word that was on the gray ship's prow, spoken by a species that should have knelt and did not, that should have been counted and unmade and forgotten, and instead had gone away into the dark and thought about it for a very long time and come back as the thing that did not negotiate. The gray ship was not the first of its kind. That was the fragment Eshk saw. The gray ship was the answer that small blue world had built to the question its own conquerors had asked, and once the answer was built, it did not stop with the conquerors. It went out into the galaxy looking for everyone who asked the same question, everyone who told the dark that they were inevitable, everyone who taught the word no to others and never expected to hear it back. The Veil had not been hunted. The Veil had simply asked the question, 2,000 years ago, loudly enough that the answer eventually came. There was a name in the fragment. Eshk could not read it. It was in the same hard script as the gray ship's prow, and the translation engines were gone with the rest of the War Court's lattice. But it had a shape, the name, and the shape was 3 words, and one of the soft species the Veil had conquered would tell Irusen, much later, what those 3 words meant when she described the shape to them. They meant the 10th silence. It was not the name of the gray ship. It was the name of the thing that built the gray ship, the patient force out in the dark that the small blue world had become, the 10th time the galaxy had fallen silent before something it could not unmake, and the first time the silence had answered back. Eshkada tore his mind free of the casting and found that he was on the deck, and that he was the last forecaster of the ordinate, and that there was nothing in the future worth casting for anymore. "Where does it go?" the regent asked him. She had not seen the fragment. She would die without seeing it. "Eshka, where does it go when this is done?" "Home," Eshka said. It was the only true thing he had left. "It goes home, Regent. It does not want the galaxy." It came to answer a question, and the question is almost answered, and then it goes home, and we will never know where home is, because we are not the ones who get to know. We are the ones who get answered. The gray ship took the fold from the Regent's cruiser. It was the gentlest of all of them, that last one. The Regent's resonant chamber simply went quiet, the way a held breath is let go, and the command cruiser of the second expansion hung in the dark, ordinary metal now, blind and honest and alive, with a regent aboard it who had ruled an empire and would now rule nothing, and a forecaster aboard it who had seen, for one instant, the past of the thing that had answered them, and would carry it in silence to the end of his days. And then the gray ship turned. It did not fold. It had never once folded. Folding was a veil thing, a bending thing, and the gray ship did not bend. It simply began, slowly, to stop being real. The scarred gray hull grew thin against the stars. The unreadable name faded. The small, hard word beneath it was the last thing to go, hanging in the dark after the rest of the ship had already gone. A single refusal printed on the empty void, and then it too was gone, and the orbit was empty, and the veil ordinate, which had ruled the eastern arm of the galaxy for 2,000 years, was alone with the wreckage of itself. The gray ship was never seen again. That was the part the galaxy could not forgive, in the strange new age that came after. Not the unmaking of the ordinate. The conquered world celebrated that with a joy so fierce it frightened them. What the galaxy could not forgive, could not even fully understand, was that the gray ship simply left. It did not stay to be thanked. It did not stay to rule. It did not stay to make sure the freed worlds built something better than the ordinate, or to punish them if they did not. It answered the question the veil had asked, and it answered it completely, and then it went home, wherever home was, and it took its terrible patience and its single word with it, and the galaxy was left to figure out, for the first time in 2,000 years, what to do with itself when no one was telling it what to do. The conquered world searched for it, of course. They wanted to thank it, to study it, to ask it the 1,000 questions Iru Sen had not been able to answer. They cast for it with their own crude lattices, and listened for it with patient old radio, and sent folded couriers to the edges of charted space, and they found nothing, because there was nothing to find, because the gray ship had only ever been findable when it chose to be, and it had no reason left to choose. The 10th silence, whatever it was, wherever the small blue world had gone when it went into the dark, did not want to be found by the galaxy it had freed. It had not freed the galaxy for thanks. It had answered a question. The two things were not the same, and Iru Sen spent the rest of her life trying to teach the difference to people who desperately wanted them to be the same. She lived among the Tamen until she was old. She never went back to the ordinate. There was no ordinate to go back to, only scattered worlds of mortal veil learning, slowly and badly, to be something other than conquerors. Some of them learned, some of them did not. Iru Sen did what she could, which was to tell the truth, over and over, to anyone who would listen, because she had been the first to understand it, and she felt that made it her job. The thing she told them, at the end, when they asked her what the lesson of the gray ship had been, was never the thing they expected. "You think the lesson is that the strong fall," she would say, "that the ordinate was proud, and the gray ship humbled it, and now you must not be proud. That is not the lesson. The veil were not destroyed for being proud. The galaxy is full of proud things, and most of them die in their beds. The veil were destroyed for one thing only, and it is the thing you must understand if you want to keep your freedom, because it is the easiest thing in the universe to become. The veil could not say no to themselves. That is all. That is the entire lesson. We could say no to anyone else. We built an empire out of it. But we could never once turn the word inward. The regent could not choose to stop. The prime could not choose to spare. Even at the very end, when Eshk offered the one move that might have cost the gray ship something, the regent could not take it, because it required the ordinate to deny itself, and the ordinate had never in 2,000 years denied itself anything. The gray ship could. That was the whole difference between us. The gray ship wanted nothing, asked for nothing, took nothing, stayed for nothing. It could have ruled the galaxy and it chose not to. It could have been worshipped and it left. It said no to us, yes. But the reason it could say no to us, the reason it was the gray ship and we were only the veil, is that it had first learned to say no to itself. We made the word a weapon, they made it a discipline, and in the end, the discipline unmade the weapon, the way it always will, the way it always has. In every age the galaxy has a name for, and every age it has forgotten. The envoys would go away to carry her words, and most of them would understand only half, and Iru Sen knew that, and told them anyway, because half was better than the nothing the ordinate had ever given. She died on a clear evening on Taman Reach. Among the soft people who had pulled her from a wreck, they had every reason to leave her dying in, and the last thing she did, the very last casting of the last forecaster of the ordinate, was to reach out one final time, with the broken remnant of her lattice sense, toward the place where the gray ship had gone. She found nothing. She had known she would, but she smiled anyway, there at the end, because the nothing was not the cold blank nothing of a thing that could not be seen. It was a different nothing. It was the nothing of a thing that had finished what it came to do and gone home, and was, somewhere out in the dark on the far side of the galaxy, simply at rest, not watching, not waiting, not present in every place an empire might think to be, because there was no empire left in the eastern arm that needed answering. The gray ship was not hunting anymore. It was just home, wherever home was, a small blue world or the memory of one, resting until the next time the galaxy got loud, until the next inevitable thing told the dark it could not be refused, until the next question was asked loudly enough to deserve the answer. And it would come again. Iru Sen was certain of that, the way she had been certain of the future of the hollow crown in the very first second, before the instruments agreed with her. Somewhere in the galaxy, right now, something was telling the worlds beneath it that it was inevitable. Something was teaching the word no to others and laughing at the idea of ever hearing it back. Something was gathering a formation, planning a conquest, certain in the way the veil had been certain, and one day that something would gather its whole strength into a single orbit and feel safe, and there would be a blank patch of space at the center of its victory formation, a hole in the shape of a ship, and it would order its forecaster to cast, and the forecaster would touch the future and see it coming apart, and the warning would come too late, the way it always came too late, the way it had come too late for the veil. The gray ship would uncloak, the unreadable name would resolve, and every alien empire that had ever taught the galaxy the word no would read the small hard line beneath that name and learn, at last, far too late, that the word had never belonged to them at all. Iru Sen closed her eyes on the clear evening and let the casting go, and was, for the first time since the lattice first lied to her, completely unafraid. Far out in the dark, on the other side of everything, a scarred gray hull rested above a small blue world, and did not stir, and waited, with the patience of a thing that wants nothing and has all the time in the universe, for the galaxy to need answering again. It would not have to wait long, it never did. But that was a question for another empire, in another age, with another forecaster on another doomed bridge, watching a blank patch of space at the center of a victory that was already over and not yet knowing it. The veil had had their turn. The veil had asked the question, and the gray ship had answered it, completely and patiently and without a single thing left undone, and then it had gone home. And the eastern arm of the galaxy, free for the first time in 2,000 years, learned slowly and clumsily and at terrible cost what the gray ship had known all along, and never said, because it only ever said one word. that the word no is only a weapon in the mouths of those who cannot turn it on themselves, and that somewhere in the dark, patient and scarred and home at last, is the one thing in all the universe that learned to turn it inward first, and so earned the right to speak at last.